And the question, my aim to ask that question there was related to transport, mainly transport. The regulation portion we will discuss today, and that might be the reason why you did not understand that one. We will discuss it again today. The main thing there is the thyroid hormones are transported bound to proteins, and the physiologically active form is the free form, which means not the bound form. In the blood, part of thyroid hormones are most of the thyroid hormone molecules are bound to proteins, and some less than 1% are free in the plasma. And mainly the free form is active. Therefore, the free form determines the physiological activity. If free form is increased, thyroid activity is increased. And if free form is decreased, thyroid activity is decreased. And based on that, we say whether it is hyperthyroidism or hypothyroidism or euthyroidism. When there is increase in bound form, but normal free form, there will not be any hyperthyroid features. As long as free form is normal, no change in thyroid activity, physiological activity, functional activity. When there is increase in levels of the binding proteins, the free form, suppose there is normal thyroid hormone levels, both free and bound, and also normal. Just wait a minute. Okay, are you following me?
Yes, sir.
In pregnancy, in pregnancy, there is increase in synthesis of the binding proteins, thyroid binding globulins. Therefore, the free form that is already there will bind to the protein. Therefore, now free form initially tends to decrease, but it is not a sudden process. Protein synthesis in pregnancy is not a sudden process; it goes on gradually. Therefore, with increase in synthesis of binding proteins or binding protein levels, there will be increase in synthesis of hormones from the thyroid gland also, so that free form will not change. In other words, with increase in binding proteins, though more thyroid hormones bind to the newly found proteins, the free form will not decrease. The prevention of decrease in free form will be caused by new hormone synthesis from the thyroid gland. And the final situation is there will be increase in the hormones bound to proteins, and therefore there will be increase in total hormone level, means both bound and free form. Total binding, bound plus free form, but free form will remain normal, because free form, it is the free form that is regulated, physiologically regulated. The feedback mechanisms are mediated by the free form, and it is the free form that is regulated and also that is physiologically active. And in most of the cases, the physiologically active form is regulated. Therefore, homeostasis can be maintained. Is it clear now? Yes or no?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay, we will discuss regulation again, and it will be more clear again. The main point there was the total level of thyroid hormone may depend not only on the synthetic activity of the thyroid gland, but also the binding protein level. The main point there was that one. Binding protein levels can alter the total hormone level, but it cannot say whether there is hyperthyroidism or hypothyroidism. finally we have to check the free form, not the total form. That was the main point there. Okay, good. Now I think we should start now. Now, last time we discussed about what thyroid hormones are, how they are synthesized, how they are transported. And today we will discuss about the remaining portions regarding thyroid physiology. And today we will include the mechanism of action at the molecular level, then the physiological actions or functions, important functions, and then how thyroid hormone level or activity is regulated. And we will briefly discuss about the pathophysiology of some thyroid disorders. The details you study in pathology, we will just touch based on the physiological concepts. Okay, good. The incorrect statement. The first option is plasma T4 level is higher than plasma T3 level. That is correct. Most of the hormones secreted from the thyroid gland is T4, and also the plasma concentration is higher for T4. T3 is much more potent than T4. That is also correct. T3 is more potent, about 5 times, much more potent than T4. Therefore, T4 is also regarded as pro-hormone for T3. T4 has some activity, but T3 has much more activity. Most of the circulating T3 is converted to T4 in the peripheral tissue. It is incorrect because the opposite is true. T4 is converted to T3 in the peripheral tissues by deiodination. And last option is T4 is eliminated more slowly than T3 from the plasma. And it is true. And in other words, T4 has a longer plasma half-life than T3. Therefore, if we have to give thyroid hormones as drugs to treat some hypothyroid conditions, T4 is preferred, and one of the reasons is it has longer half-life. It is eliminated more slowly. Therefore, the dosing frequency is less. Eliminated more slowly or longer plasma half-life means the dosing frequency is less. It means there is more compliance and it is easier to administer. Okay, good. Therefore, here the answer is C, and you are correct. Next. Now, this figure shows the mechanism of action of thyroid hormones at the receptor level. You can see thyroid hormones 4 and a small amount T3, and we have seen most of the T4 in the periphery is converted to T3 by deiodinase. T4 is transported into the cell, and T4 is lipid soluble hormone, and you know lipid soluble hormones, lipophilic. Can you see it now?
Yes, sir.
Is it changed now?
Yes, sir.
Okay, I think now it will work. Okay, once inside the cell, there is formation of T3 by deiodination of T4. Deiodinase enzyme. Deiodination means, you know, T4 has 4 iodine atoms, T3 3 iodine atoms. Therefore, the reaction will be deiodination. And this lipophilic hormone, after entering the cell, will act on the nuclear receptors. One common property of the lipophilic hormones is mostly they have intracellular receptors, and here the receptors are inside the nucleus, and the hormone molecules, they enter the nucleus and there they bind with the receptor, here thyroid hormone receptor, that is already bound with retinoid X receptors. We call it heterodimer. And once there is activation of this receptor, it initiates it or it activates thyroid hormone response element in the DNA. response element is the part of the DNA. And now there is initiation of some gene transcription, forming mRNA, and then translation, forming proteins. And this general mechanism is common for all hormones that have nuclear receptors. And here the difference is the specificity of the receptor, name of the receptors. The remaining general mechanism is same. Just remember, they have intranuclear receptors, and activation of the receptors initiates gene transcription and finally formation of proteins. And here, thyroid hormone activates a large number of genes. Therefore, a large variety of proteins are synthesized in different cells. And therefore, thyroid hormone has a wide variety of actions. And another information you can get from this figure is, because there is protein synthesis, finally the most of the actions of thyroid hormones are due to finally protein synthesis. It takes some time, maybe some hours, or for some effects even days, to be seen. And this is in contrast with the immediate actions of some hormones like adrenaline, for example, that change the ion channel activities in the cell membrane. Their effects are immediate. For the effects that are shown after formation of proteins, it takes some time, and this is one of the mechanisms that thyroid hormones have slow onset of action that we have already mentioned also. Okay, next. Can you see the next slide?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now we talk about the functions of thyroid hormones. In other words, you can say physiological actions or physiological effects of thyroid hormones. And as we have seen, it influences nuclear transcription, large number of genes in cells throughout the body. And in different cells, different genes are more activated. And therefore, the effects will not be exactly the same in different cells, but at least we have to remember there are wide discrete effects and effects almost in all cells or cells throughout the body. And optimal thyroid activity means the optimal means neither too high nor too low. Thyroid activity is required for proper functioning of multiple body tissues or systems. The effects of thyroid hormones are not on a single body system, in multiple, almost all systems. Let's begin the list with metabolism, then growth and development of nervous system, mainly central nervous system, then skeletal growth, in other words, bone growth, then cardiovascular health. There are effects in cardiovascular system, skin, skeletal muscles, gastrointestinal system, reproductive system, and even other endocrine organs. And from the list, you can see almost all of the systems. You can say all systems are affected, and some are more affected, and the effects on some of the systems are even more important. And this is because thyroid hormone, they activate synthesis of many different proteins. And you know proteins have a variety of functions. Some are enzymes, some are transport proteins, some are structural proteins, and therefore the effects can be widespread. Enzymes, you know, most of the metabolic reactions, they are influenced by enzymes, and therefore whenever there is change in synthesis of hormones, there will be changes in metabolism. And you know all of the cells have metabolic activities. Let's begin with the effects of thyroid hormones on metabolism. And the most widely known effect is increase in basal metabolic rate, abbreviated as BMR, basal metabolic rate. And thyroid hormone increases the rate of reactions of almost all reactions. You can say many reactions. And based on that, the net metabolic rate of the body at rest is also increased. There is certain definition of basal metabolic rate, you will learn later or in biochemistry also. But the idea here is, it signifies the net metabolic rate in the body at resting condition. It means it is measured in terms of the energy produced, heat produced per unit time. And therefore, when there is increase in metabolic rate, there will be more heat production also, which is called thermogenesis. Thermo means heat. And therefore, there is more heat production in the body. Because there is heat transfer during chemical reactions. And no reactions are completely efficient, 100% efficient. Therefore, there is some loss of energy in the form of heat. And that is thermogenesis. And one part of the metabolism is ATP synthesis also. And during ATP synthesis also there is loss of heat during the reaction, that is release of heat. And it is related to oxygen consumption also. More ATP synthesis, more oxygen consumption. And this effect finally results into increase in heat production in the body and tendency to rise temperature. Optimal levels of thyroid hormones are required to maintain optimal level of basal metabolic rate. If thyroid hormone level is increased, there will be increase in the metabolic rate. And if thyroid hormone level is decreased, there will be decrease in metabolic rate. To keep the metabolic rate at the optimal level, at the good level, thyroid hormone concentration should also be at good level. Next one is protein synthesis. And we now know the mechanism of action of thyroid hormones is protein synthesis. Therefore, obviously, there will be increase in synthesis of different enzymes, transport proteins, structural proteins. And regarding glucose metabolism, there is increased glycolysis. Remember, increased metabolism, ATP synthesis, glycolysis. Increased use of glucose, glycogenolysis. To provide that glucose, glycogen stores will be used. And gluconeogenesis, new glucose will also be formed. And glucose absorption from the intestine is also increased. And in lipid metabolism, lipolysis, again use of the lipids, stored lipids, fats for energy by fatty acid oxidation. And another effect is biliary cholesterol excretion. Means with increase in thyroid hormone level, or even at the normal level, the function is to take the lipids, cholesterol from the plasma to the liver and then excrete it in the bile. Therefore, when there is decrease in thyroid levels, there is chance of increased cholesterol level in the blood. Therefore, the people with low thyroid levels have increased risk of having atherosclerotic diseases. Now, from this slide, you can see there is overall increase in metabolism. Regarding protein, mostly synthesis, and also because the protein catabolism is also influenced by the enzymes. When there are high levels of thyroid hormones, catabolism may be more than synthesis. Therefore, weight loss can occur. But at the optimal level, the net effect is protein synthesis. But remember, thyroid hormone also increases the synthesis of catabolic enzymes also. Regarding glucose utilization is increased, and fat utilization is increased. And when there is increase in the use of nutrients, there is increase in thermogenesis also, oxygen consumption. You can correlate like this. Now there is one question here. Based on the information in the previous slide, you can answer this question. A person with hyperthyroidism may present with all except hyperthyroidism means increased level of thyroid activity. Okay, when there is increase in thyroid level, there will be increase in metabolism, increased heat production, and in our body there are mechanisms to regulate body temperature. When there is increased heat generation in the body, the homeostatic mechanism will try to increase heat loss. Therefore, there will be increased sweating to produce heat loss, to cause heat loss, increased sweating. And during that process, the vasodilation is one of the mechanisms, and there will be warm skin also. These two can occur in hyperthyroidism. What about heat intolerance? Heat intolerance means the person has less capacity to tolerate heat. In case of hyperthyroidism, already there are mechanisms to lose heat. They have already activated. And when there is again increase in environmental temperature, the person has less capacity to produce heat loss, to cause heat loss. In other words, due to hyperthyroidism itself, the person has already started sweating. When there is increase in environmental temperature, now the person cannot increase sweating to the extent that a normal person would be able to. Therefore, there will be heat intolerance also. Heat intolerance is one of the important features, clinical features of hyperthyroidism. And discomfort in cold environment is the opposite to heat intolerance. Therefore, the answer here is discomfort in cold environment. And this occurs in hypothyroidism because the person cannot produce adequate heat in the body in hypothyroidism. Therefore, there will be difficulty in facing cold environment. Okay, good. Next. Now, effects on nervous system. This one is very important. Do not forget it. Whenever we say function of thyroid hormone, we tend to say metabolism. And at the cellular level or at the system level, important effects are, one of the important function is growth and development of nervous system, growth and maturation of nervous system. It facilitates, means thyroid hormone facilitates growth, proliferation, branching, myelination, formation of synapses between the neurons in the central nervous system during fetal life and in the postnatal life after birth, during childhood. We know the nervous system, central nervous system, or brain, spinal cord, they grow mainly during the fetal life and during the early childhood. Most of the growth is within first 2 years. And for that growth and maturation, thyroid hormone is one essential hormone. When there is hypothyroidism during fetal life or early childhood, the critical period during which nervous system grows and growth of the nervous system mostly occurs. If there is hypothyroidism during that period, there is chance of permanent intellectual disability, means permanent mental impairment or disability. And it is permanent, in other words, irreversible. Means if during this critical period there is hypothyroidism, we cannot treat it or improve the disability after that period by giving thyroid hormones later. In other words, if there is hypothyroidism, severe hypothyroidism in the fetal life or in the first 2 years, we cannot treat it by giving thyroid hormones once the child is 8 years old. Therefore, it is called permanent. This is very important. And it is one of the cause of preventable intellectual disability or preventable mental impairment or retardation. Therefore, nowadays, in hospitals, there is screening for every child to see whether there is hypothyroidism or not. Because if we detect hypothyroidism in this period, we can give thyroid hormones as treatment and we can prevent this mental impairment. Very important. Now, effects on skeletal growth. Thyroid hormones facilitate growth during fetal life and childhood. And we know skeletal growth occurs before the closure of epiphyseal plates, that is up to late adolescence. And during this period, thyroid hormones have important role. We have already seen the role of growth hormone. And that at that time, we mentioned the role of thyroid hormones also. They work together. And hypothyroid children, they suffer from growth retardation. They have short stature, low height, short height. And the one feature is infantile body proportions. Let's see this next figure. In this figure, this is a child, 8 years child, normal height. This one is 8 years child, say growth hormone deficiency, decrease in height, you can see here. And this one is hypothyroid, 8 years. And this one is normal, 2 years. And these two are dwarf child, or we can say they are small for age. And here, obviously their height is less as compared to the normal one. And the difference between this hypothyroid and the growth hormone deficient one is, though their height is same, their body proportions are not same. See this line. This one is symphysis pubis at this level. And this child with growth hormone deficiency, it has half of the body part is above the symphysis pubis and half below this one. But in this case, you can see less than half is below the symphysis and more than half is above symphysis. And this proportion is same as the child of 2 years. Therefore, we call it infantile proportions. And from this figure, you have seen as the age increases, the ratio, the lower body part lengthens more than the upper one. You can see here. If it is confusing, let me explain it again. This person, see this one, this child, 2 years, height is 35, and lower body part below the symphysis 15 and above 35, means the upper proportion, the upper part is, if you take the ratio of the upper part to the lower part, the upper part, you can see the upper one is longer. In this child, 8 years, lower one and upper one are equal. You can see here. And growth hormone deficient child, 8 years, it has normal body proportions, means upper and lower equal. But hypothyroid, same age, it has the body proportions that are similar to the younger children. Therefore, we call it infantile. Body proportions are similar to the younger one, not the older one. Okay, therefore, if there is a child that is short stature, and now you know at least two possibilities, growth hormone deficiency and thyroid hormone deficiency. To differentiate this one, you measure the body proportions and from demarcation at the symphysis pubis. If upper body part is longer than the lower one, And we have to compare this proportion for that age, the child with normal growth for that age. And if the proportions are similar to the infant, you can say it is more likely to be due to thyroid deficiency. I think it is clear now. Even if not, you can study this figure again and you can make conclusions on your own also. Now, effects on the cardiovascular system. With increase in metabolism in the tissues, there will be increased blood flow. When there is increased blood flow throughout the body, more blood will return to the heart, and therefore there will be increase in cardiac output also. And another effect is increase in heart rate. One is to pump that more blood coming to the heart, more venous return, to pump more blood coming to the heart. And another one is there is direct effect of thyroid hormones in the heart muscles also, and that is to increase heart rate. And this mechanism to directly increase heart rate is mediated directly or through increased sensitivity or number of the beta receptors in the heart. And there are other mechanisms also. At least remember there is increase in heart rate, increase in cardiac output, and increase in heart strength also, inotropic effect, increase in heart rate, chronotropic effect. And you can see these effects are similar to the sympathetic activation. Just remember the effect similar to sympathetic activation. And also remember there is increase in these activities. Thyroid hormone, increase in metabolic rate, increase in energy consumption, increase in heart rate, cardiac output, heart strength. Everything is increasing. Relation to catecholamines. And we have already seen the effects are similar to that of the catecholamines. And when they act together, the net effect is even greater than the just addition. We call it synergism. And catecholamines and thyroid hormones, they show synergistic effects to increase metabolic rate. Catecholamines, mainly adrenaline, also increases metabolic rate and heart rate and stimulation of nervous system also. Stimulation of nervous system means we have seen the growth and development of nervous system in children. In adults also, there is a stimulatory effect on nervous system. In hypothyroidism, that is low thyroid hormone levels, there is sluggish mentation. The mental activities are also slow. Thyroid hormones have effects to increase mental activity. But very high levels are not good. That can cause nervousness, anxiety, dissociation of the thought process. Thyroid hormones may increase expression of catecholamine receptors. Mechanism of synergism may be thyroid hormones have effect, permissive action on catecholamines, which means in the presence of thyroid hormones, catecholamines are permitted to perform their actions. It is called permissive action. In the absence of thyroid hormones, catecholamines cannot show their effects much. But in the presence of thyroid hormone, just presence gives the. Now, regulation of thyroid hormone secretion. We have seen the effects in some of the systems. We mentioned about metabolism, central nervous system, cardiovascular system. And besides this, if you see the list, the previous list, you can see other systems also, like cardiovascular, like skin. Thyroid hormones are also required for skin health, proliferation of epithelium throughout the body and also in the skin, epidermis. And therefore, there may be nail and skin changes, hair changes in thyroid disorders. And skeletal muscle activity, skeletal muscle functioning also requires optimal levels of thyroid hormones. And tremors, we can see tremors means repetitive or rhythmic movements of body parts, say hands, when there is hyperthyroidism. Skeletal muscle activity is increased in hyperthyroidism and decreased in hypothyroidism. Gastrointestinal effects, both motility and secretion, are increased by thyroid hormone. Reproductive health, thyroid hormones have a role in facilitating gametogenesis, and also different hormone levels, sex hormone levels, may be affected by thyroid hormone levels, and therefore there can be menstrual disorders in case of thyroid disorders. And other endocrine functioning of other glands are also affected by thyroid hormones because they also have cells and their metabolism is also affected by thyroid hormones. And I'm not going into the details of these other systems due to lack of time. We can read from the book also, and we will cover some of them in our questions in the Google class. And there is one question: what is the difference between synergistic and permissive effects? And here the synergistic effect is due to permissive effect. And by terminology, synergism means when two factors work together, their effect is greater than just addition. And the definition of permissive effect is one hormone can act only at the presence of another hormone. For example, if catecholamines cannot function in the absence of thyroid hormones, we say thyroid hormones have permissive effect on catecholamines. And in case of thyroid and catecholamines, even in the absence of thyroid hormones, there will be effect of catecholamines. Therefore, it is not a pure one, very strict one. In some other cases, we will see in some other classes, one hormone is necessary for the functioning of the another one, though it does not directly affect the other one. Though here the permissive effect, the term is used in some books in case of thyroid and catecholamines also, but this is not a very strict one. Therefore, I think the better term is synergism here. But if someone asks you, what do I mean by permissive effect of thyroid hormones on catecholamines, we can mention this one. Is it okay? Okay, now regulation. Thyroid hormones have widespread effects, we have seen. And to maintain homeostasis, the thyroid hormone levels themselves should be maintained at a constant level when there are no increased requirements. And to regulate these thyroid hormone levels, there are mechanisms in the body to tightly regulate this one. There is narrow range for their variation. And this mechanism, this regulation occurs through negative feedback mechanism. And you know, negative feedback mechanism is the common one to regulate any physiological parameter. And for thyroid hormones also, that is the case. Here, the circulating free T4 and T3 have negative feedback effect on TSH, thyroid stimulating hormone, that is secreted by the anterior pituitary. And the effect here is one directly on the anterior pituitary and another by action on the thyrotropin releasing hormone that is secreted from the hypothalamus. See this figure, it will be more clear here. We have seen the hypothalamo pituitary thyroid axis. Hypothalamus secretes thyrotropin releasing hormone TRH. It acts on anterior pituitary that secretes thyroid stimulating hormone. Now this TSH stimulates thyroid hormone secretion from the thyroid gland. We call it hypothalamo thyroid
Okay.
hypothalamus, pituitary, thyroid axis. Okay. Now from the thyroid gland, T3 and T4, they are secreted and they have different actions. Now, what is the effect of thyroid hormones on anterior pituitary and hypothalamic secretions? The effect is thyroid hormones, they inhibit anterior pituitary secretion of TSH and they inhibit the TRS secretion from hypothalamus. And the more profound, the major effect is on the anterior pituitary, that is on TSH. Though both effects are possible, major one is on the at the level of anterior pituitary, that is direct effect on thyroid stimulating hormone. Therefore, we can see the mechanism here. Suppose there is increased secretion of thyroid hormones in some cases. Now, what will be the regulatory mechanism? When there is increase in thyroid hormone level, it will decrease TSH secretion. Now, there will be less TSH and that will cause less thyroid hormone secretion. Initially, there was increase in thyroid hormone secretion. Now, there is less thyroid hormone secretion. It means there is balance. In other words, this negative feedback loop, it prevents change in levels of thyroid hormone secretion. That is the mechanism of regulation of thyroid hormones. And you can see this is one typical negative feedback loop. We mentioned it in our general endocrine physiology also. Now, effects of TSS, thyroid gland. We have already seen that TSS, thyroid stimulating hormone, it increases thyroid hormone synthesis and secretion. And we have also seen the steps of synthesis of thyroid hormones. And now we have to know that TSS stimulates almost all steps of thyroid hormone synthesis. And finally, increasing thyroid hormone secretion. Not only these biochemical reactions are increased, there is also increase in size and number of thyroid cells under the action of thyroid stimulating hormone. And this information is also important. We will see it soon. Regarding thyroid disorders, we can categorize them as hypothyroidism and hyperthyroidism. As the name suggests, hypo is less, thyroid hormone deficiency, and hyperthyroidism is excess of thyroid hormones. And these disorders can be categorized as primary and secondary. Primary hypothyroidism or hyperthyroidism means the defect is at the level of thyroid gland. In other words, the defect is primary to the thyroid gland. The cause of thyroid disorder lies in the thyroid gland. We call them primary disorders. And secondary disorders are due to the defects at the level of anterior pituitary or hypothalamus. And we know anterior pituitary and hypothalamus plays role in secretion of thyroid hormones. Therefore, their defects can cause the disorders of thyroid hormones. And there are two severe forms of these disorders. One is thyroid storm. Storm means, you know the meaning of storm. Some dangerous thing that is due to increase in something. And when there is severe increase in thyroid hormone levels, sudden and severe increase in thyroid hormone levels, we call it thyroid storm. And there is one clinical presentation, and that is one medical emergency. If not treated, can cause death, even with treatment in some cases. And myxedema coma is a similar, you can say it is also a medical emergency, and it is a severe form of hypothyroidism. And there may be different causes of thyroid disorders. The causes may lie in the thyroid glands or in the pituitary or hypothalamus. And in some cases, even some drugs, radiations, surgeries, dietary causes can cause the disorders. And there is a list of these different causes. You can go through them. And just to mention, hypothyroidism can be caused by iodine deficiency. We know it. And also, remember, extreme excess can cause hypothyroidism, though for a short duration, transient. And this one is called extreme excess of iodine can cause hypothyroidism transiently for short duration. This is called Wolff-Chaikoff effect. And another one is congenital, with birth, before birth, and hypothyroidism in early childhood that will have effects on mental growth. And Hashimoto's thyroiditis is another one common one, and there are some surgeries and drugs. Hyperthyroidism, common one, most common is Graves' disease, autoimmune disorder, and there may be multinodular goiter. Iodine excess up to certain limit can cause hyperthyroidism. See the effect of iodine. Iodine deficiency, hypothyroidism. Iodine excess within certain range, hyperthyroidism. If beyond that limit, again hypothyroidism. And you will see in pharmacology also, iodine has multiple applications. And it has a role in diagnosis of thyroid disorders. And we have seen in synthesis of thyroid hormones. And we can use thyroid hormones in high concentration to treat hyperthyroid conditions, and in reasonable concentrations for treatment of hypothyroid conditions. Now our next topic is endemic colloid goiter. You know the meaning of the term endemic?
Yes,
Endemic
sir.
means, yes, please.
It is the prevalence in certain geographic area.
Okay, good. When a certain disease or disorder is present in high frequency in a certain area, is called endemic. And this colloid goiter, which is due to dietary iodine deficiency, it occurs in the regions where there is low iodine in their diet, and the only source of iodine is the foods related to foods that have origin from sea. Therefore, in the areas remote from the seas, where people do not consume foods from sea, like fishes or other vegetables also, or where the soil does not contain adequate amount of iodine to have adequate levels in other foods, there are chances of endemic colloid goiter or due to iodine deficiency. And it was very common previously. And due to iodination of salt, it is now not so common. But we have to know it, because if we do not consume the iodinated salt properly, it is still a probability. And it is preventable. We can prevent it. Therefore, we have to know it. It presents with hypothyroidism, and the mechanism of enlarged thyroid gland here is when there is lack of iodine in diet, there is low thyroid hormone synthesis, low thyroid hormone levels in plasma, then decreased feedback inhibition of TSH secretion. Means there is low thyroid hormone level, and there is less inhibition of TSH secretion. Means there is increase in secretion of TSH from anterior pituitary. Then these high TSH levels, they have effect on thyroid gland to grow, to increase the size and number of cells, and also the size of the follicles. And finally, the thyroid gland is enlarged. Therefore, the cause of goiter, the mechanism, pathophysiology of goiter in case of iodine deficiency is mediated by increase in TSH secretion that will increase the size of the thyroid gland. What do you see in this figure? already this one is neck region, and you can see a large swelling in the neck, and it is goiter. Now answer this question. A person with extreme iodine deficiency may have all except low serum T3 and T4. Iodine deficiency, low synthesis or decreased synthesis of T3 and T4, therefore low serum T3 and T4. Low serum TSS concentration. Will it be there? When there is decrease in T3 and T4 concentration, there will be less inhibition of TSS secretion. Therefore, TSS secretion will increase to compensate for T3 and T4 synthesis. It is compensatory mechanism. Therefore, TSS concentration will be high, not low, not even normal. It will be high. Low serum iodine concentration. That is also possible because there is iodine deficiency. And low urine iodine concentration. That also occurs because the kidneys try to conserve iodine when there is iodine deficiency. Therefore, iodine concentration in the urine will also be less than normal. Therefore, the answer is B here. TSS concentration will be increased in that case. Now, clinical features of hypothyroidism. Most of the features we can derive from our previous discussion of the functions of thyroid gland. And another one we have to know is edema, means swelling of different body parts. And here the face is shown here. And the swelling is non-pitting, means when we press the area, there will not be pitting or depression in the pressed area. And in many cases, for example, edema due to cardiovascular causes, there will be pitting edema. There will be edema, but when we press the region, for example, the anterolateral aspect of the leg over tibia, there after on compression for about 10 seconds, there will be a depression left. But in this case, there will not be depression. Therefore, we call it non-pitting. And the region is believed to be due to accumulation of some molecules, hyaluronic acid and some other substances there in the tissues, and that draw water and that keep water with it. Therefore, it will not be displaced with pressure. And another one we have already mentioned is congenital hypothyroidism or cretinism. It is caused by extreme hypothyroidism during fetal life, infancy, or childhood. And it is characterized by permanent, irreversible intellectual disability, failure of growth, and sluggish movement. There are other features also. Just do not forget this one: growth and mental development. Graves' disease. This is the most common cause of hyperthyroidism, and the pathophysiology is there is formation of antibodies, thyroid stimulating immunoglobulins, and these TSIs, they act on TSS receptors, and therefore they increase secretion of thyroid glands. You study in details in pathology. Just for now, remember Graves' disease causes hyperthyroidism, antibody mediated. Clinical features we can derive from the functions of thyroid gland and the particular characteristic ones. And here is exophthalmos, means protrusion of eyes. We can see here the eyes seem to protrude out of their normal location, and this is also antibody mediated, immune mediated, due to swelling in the region behind the eyes, and that pushes these eyes forward, and there is weakness of the extraocular muscle cells. As we are close to the end of our class, let me summarize what we learned today. And you will revise the thyroid disorders again. I will give you the slides, you will go through them. and most of the features you can derive from the actions of thyroid hormones. If you have difficulty, we will discuss it again. Regarding the functions, there are widespread functions. Do not forget increase in basal metabolic rate, or you can say it maintains, because increase in thyroid hormone level is also not good and decrease is also not good. Therefore, we can say it maintains basal metabolic rate. Another one is growth and development of nervous system. Do not forget this one. And also skeletal growth. And cardiovascular effects, they are similar to sympathetic effects, chronotropic and inotropic effects. And thyroid function tests, basic thyroid function tests are serum TSH, free T4 and free T3 levels. Remember, free here, free are more physiologically important. And when the cause is primary or at the level of thyroid, TSH is the best marker, because the free T4 and T3 levels may be normal at the expense of change in TSH level. Therefore, in mild cases, T4 and T3 levels may be normal, but TSH levels may be altered. Therefore, the most sensitive marker is TSH. If the defect is at the thyroid level. Next, we will discuss parathyroid hormones. I will give some questions on thyroid gland. There will be revision and addition of some areas also there. Try to answer those questions. If you have any questions, you can email me or we can discuss in our next class also. Okay? Okay, physiology. Understanding physiology of thyroid hormones is very important to understand pathology of thyroid hormones. Mainly the regulation portion is very important. You have to see the pattern, you have to know the patterns of change in T3, T4 and TSH level in various thyroid hormone disorders. And if you understand the concept of regulation, it will not be difficult to understand that portion. Okay, thank you very much. Okay, shall we end it here? In this area, you will suspect enlargement of thyroid gland. One of the possibility will be enlargement of thyroid gland. Do you know what the condition is called? Enlargement of thyroid gland. What is the enlargement of thyroid gland called? There is one clinical term for that one. Goiter. Good. It is called goiter. Next one. What are the functions of thyroid hormones? Physiology of thyroid hormones is mainly about the functions of thyroid hormones. Here, just from your previous knowledge, mention a few points that you know about the functions. Want to regulate BMR. BMR means basal metabolic rate. Okay. Metabolism. Increase heart rate. Normal growth. I am reading your answers. Okay. And you are correct. Growth, related to growth. Okay. Good. The commonly known function is related to metabolic rate. Okay, good. Potentiate adrenergic effects. That is also correct. Vasodilation. Okay, adrenergic effect. Some of the adrenergic effects are vasodilation, some vasoconstriction, depending on the receptor. That is partly correct. Okay. Increase lipolysis. Okay, good. Okay, more or less. To begin with, that is enough. We have done well. Okay, next. Now there is another question. Try to answer this one. Deficiency of the following micronutrient or mineral causes goiter. Okay, the correct answer is iodine. You are all correct.
Iodine.
It causes deficiency of iodine, causes goiter. And in which areas there is deficiency of iron? In other words, how can we prevent deficiency of iodine? Iodine deficiency can be prevented by, now it is not common. Iodine deficiency in humans is not common these days. But previously it was not uncommon in our settings. Now, what is the preventive measure? Having iodized salt, very good. It is basic but must know. And these days, iodine is added, supplemented in the common salt that we use for cooking meals. We add in meals. And when we iodize the salt, it will reach every house. And therefore, these days it is not common. That is the importance of using iodized salt. Not all common salt is properly iodized. Therefore, we have to use only the iodized salt that comes in packets in Nepal and in India also. In Nepal, it is said there is the mark of two children. There is advertisement. Dui bal balika ko chihna bhayeko iodine known. It is said like this. It is basic, and I think all of you know it and do not forget it. Okay, next. And here we have said deficiency of iodine causes thyroid hormone deficiency. Now later you will also learn very much excess of iodine also causes thyroid hormone, low levels of thyroid hormone. You will see it later. It means not only deficiency but also severe excess can cause low levels of thyroid hormones. The details of the mechanism, how iodine deficiency causes goiter, we will see later and also in pathology. Now in this figure, you can see the location of the thyroid gland, as we have already mentioned. And when we see the microscopic section of this gland, it consists of a number of follicles called thyroid follicles. And these follicles are small in size, around 0.5 millimeter or less. And under the microscopic section, they are seen consisting of this colloid-filled follicles. These are the cells, thyroid cells. And they surround a space, a lumen, which is filled with colloid, the substance that fills the follicles. It is called colloid. And as you can see here, there are a number of such follicles. And between the follicles or among the space, in the space between the follicles, there are other cells also. Here, C cells. C for calcitonin. Calcitonin is also one hormone secreted by the thyroid gland. Here we are mainly concerned with other thyroid hormones. Calcitonin will be covered during calcium homeostasis. And you can also see the space for capillaries, blood capillaries, and blood cells inside the capillary. And this figure mainly shows the structure of the thyroid follicle. These are the thyroid cells. And you can see there is single layer of cuboidal cells. And the membrane towards the lumen that contains colloid is called luminal membrane. And the opposite side towards the interstitium is called basal side. You will see it in the next figure. As we have already mentioned, thyroid gland secretes thyroid hormones, two major thyroid hormones, and calcitonin also. Though calcitonin is also secreted from thyroid gland, when we say thyroid hormone, mainly we refer to these two hormones, thyroxine and triiodothyronine. Thyroxine is also called T4 or tetraiodothyronine. And another one is T3, 3 because triiodothyronine. Two iodide components here in T3 and three iodide components in T3, therefore tri. And in T4 there are 4, but more commonly called name is thyroxine. Remember, this is very basic. T4 thyroxine and T3 triiodothyronine. Iodide group, iodide ions or atoms, and thyronine, thyroid hormone. Okay, and we will study more about calcitonin when we study calcium balance under parathyroid hormone. And as the thyroid hormones are secreted from the thyroid gland, most of the hormone is T4 rather than T3. Around 93% is T4 and around 7% is T3. And these are amino acid tyrosine derivatives. They are derived from tyrosine amino acid. If you remember the chemical classification of hormones, we mentioned peptide hormones or polypeptide hormones, steroid hormones, and tyrosine derivatives. And thyroid hormones belong to the third one, that is tyrosine amino acid derivatives. And if you remember the same class, it is lipid soluble. Tyrosine derivatives, some are lipid soluble, some are water soluble. The catecholamines are water soluble and these are lipid soluble. Just remember, this information is very important. And if you correlate it with the general endocrine physiology, a lot of information about thyroid hormone, you need not, it will be easier to memorize. Now, it is the same figure that we have already mentioned, and you can see the follicle. This one structure is one follicle. There is another follicle, and this follicle is lined by these thyroid cells, also called follicular cells. This one is lumen, containing colloid. Colloid is a substance, we'll talk more about it soon. And this thyroid cell, it has one side towards the lumen, which is called apical membrane. The cell membrane towards the apical side, luminal side is apical membrane, and the opposite side is basal membrane. Now, this figure shows a bit details about the biosynthesis of thyroid hormones. How thyroid hormones are synthesized in the thyroid gland. The more details you study in biochemistry. For now, try to remember the basic steps. Have you studied in biochemistry biosynthesis of thyroid hormones?
No, sir.
No, sir.
But you will study soon. For now, just remember some steps. This one is thyroid cell lining the thyroid follicle that we have already mentioned. One thyroid cell. There are many such thyroid cells lining the follicle. And this side is the basal side, and this side is the apical side, luminal side. Luminal or apical are same thing. This surface is facing the lumen. There will be colloid here. And the opposite side is basal side. And this cell membrane is called basal membrane, therefore. Now, iodine will be here in the interstitium that comes from blood. In the blood, it comes from intestine. In the intestine, it comes from food, mainly the salt, iodized salt. Iodine is absorbed from the intestine, and then it enters the blood. From the blood, it races throughout the body, including this thyroid gland blood. And from the capillary blood, there will be iodide ions. In the blood, iodine is in the form of iodide ion, I minus. Just like chloride, Cl minus, it is I minus. And this I minus is transported into the thyroid follicular cell by this one transporter, co-transport, secondary active transport. This NIS means sodium iodide symporter. Sodium, N for natrium, sodium. Iodide symporter or co-transporter. Secondary active transport. Function of this transporter in the basal or basolateral membrane is to actively transport iodide ions against concentration gradient into the thyroid follicular cell. In other words, it concentrates iodide ions into the cell. Its concentration inside the cell will be much higher than outside the cell, here in the interstitium or plasma, you can say. Therefore, this process is also called iodide trapping. Trapping means iodide ions are trapped from the blood into the thyroid follicular cells. Therefore, it is also called iodide trapping. Now, iodide ions, once inside the cell, they are transported across the apical membrane into the follicle here, follicular lumen, where there is colloid. And this transport here on this side, apical side, is mediated by another transporter called this iodide chloride exchanger. This exchanger, chloride ions are transported into the cell and iodide ions out of the cell to the lumen. Here, this iodide ions, this transporter is called pendrate, chloride iodide exchanger. And here, iodide ions, I minus ions, they are oxidized to form iodine. Initially, nascent iodine or triiodide. Anyway, just remember that occurs oxidation of iodide ions, because iodide ions, they cannot easily react with, they cannot really easily participate in the next reaction. It has to be oxidized, which can easily react with the substance in the next step. And this oxidation reaction is catalyzed by one enzyme called peroxidase. In the absence of peroxidase, the reaction is very slow, and that is not enough to produce enough amount of hormones. And after this oxidation process, there is iodination of one substance, thyroglobulin, in the colloid. And when we say colloid, now you have to remember this colloid is a substance filling the thyroid follicle, and it consists mainly of this thyroglobulin. Now you may ask, from where this thyroglobulin comes in the follicle? And it is the thyroid follicular cells that synthesize thyroglobulin and then transport it into the follicular lumen. We have seen iodide ions are also transported by the same thyroid cells into the lumen, and thyroglobulin also by the same cells into the lumen. Now in the lumen, the colloid, there will be thyroglobulin molecules and this iodine species there. Once this oxidized iodine is available there, it will iodinate the thyroid. To continue our today's discussion, we are talking about biosynthesis of thyroid hormones. We mentioned iodide trapping first. Iodide trapping means concentration of iodide ions into the cell. In other words, transport of iodide ions from the interstitium into the thyroid cells by this NIS, sodium iodide symporter. Then from inside the cell to the lumen, there is another transporter, pendrate. And once inside the lumen, these iodide ions are oxidized to form iodine. And iodine reacts with this thyroglobulin. Iodine is added to thyroglobulin in the presence of peroxidase enzyme, and this process is called iodination. Just remember, addition of iodine to thyroglobulin. Here is iodination of thyroglobulin. Now, once there is iodination, there is formation of monoiodotyrosine, diiodotyrosine first. Monoiodotyrosine, we will see the structure, chemical structure soon. For now, remember, mono means one, iodo means iodine, and tyrosine is the amino acid. These tyrosine amino acids are part of the thyroglobulin molecule. Thyroglobulin molecule is a large protein. Globulin is a protein. Thyro related to thyroid gland here. Thyroglobulin is a protein molecule. It contains tyrosine amino acid residues. In other words, tyrosine amino acid residues are parts of the thyroglobulin molecule. And iodine binds to the tyrosine component of that protein molecule. Therefore, we call it tyrosine derivative. Thyroid hormones are therefore called tyrosine derivatives. When one iodine is added to the tyrosine residue, we call it monoiodotyrosine, MIT here. In the next one, MIT means monoiodotyrosine. When two iodines are added to one tyrosine, we call it diiodotyrosine. And this process is called iodination, addition of iodine to tyrosine residues. And then there is another process called coupling. Coupling means pairing. This monoiodotyrosine may pair with another monoiodotyrosine component or with diiodotyrosine component, and that will give rise to the hormones, thyroid hormones T3 and T4, and some reverse T3 is also formed, but its physiological significance is not yet clear. Therefore, just remember T3 and T4. And you can see here, still this MIT, DIT, T3, T4, they are still part of the thyroglobulin molecule. They are still attached to the thyroglobulin molecule. And the colloid, majority of the colloid is formed of these molecules. Then there is pinocytosis, endocytosis of these thyroglobulin molecules, iodinated thyroglobulin molecules that contains these iodinated tyrosines and their coupled products. Then once there is pinocytosis and inside the cell, they are in the form of colloid droplets. And once they are inside the cell, there is degradation of the bond or link between thyroglobulin molecule and this MIT, DIT, T3, T4. These links, they are degraded, they are lysed by an enzyme called protease, proteolysis. This process can be called proteolysis. And this process releases these components, MIT, DIT, T3, T4 from the thyroglobulin molecule. Then MIT, DIT, T3 and T4 are released in the cell. T3 and T4 are released out of the cell to be secreted in the interstitium and then taken up by blood and then transported. Hence T3 and T4 are synthesized and released. The remaining components MIT and DIT means monoiodotyrosine and diiodotyrosine. They are further deiodinated, means release of iodine component from these portions, and the released iodine is recycled. And here you can see the active hormones or the physiological hormones from thyroid gland are T3 and T4, not MIT and DIT. Okay. Now here, to summarize, there is iodide trapping, means transport of iodine from interstitium into the cell, thyroid cell, and from the thyroid cell into the colloid or follicle. In the colloid or follicular lumen, there is oxidation of iodine. After oxidation, there is iodination. There is addition of iodine to thyroglobulin molecule on the tyrosine components. And then there is coupling of the iodinated tyrosine. Coupling produces T3 and T4. And this thyroglobulin containing these hormones, it is taken up into the cell where it is proteolyzed, releasing T3 and T4. And in this proteolysis, the chemical reaction is this breaking down of these bonds between these iodotyrosines or these thyrionines and thyroglobulin. Okay. The importance of this information is any deficiency or defect in these different steps can lead to decreased formation of thyroid hormones. And you will study some diseases in pathology and also some drugs that are used in different diseases. You will study in pharmacology. Now, just there is description of the steps. This will be just one revision. Biosynthesis steps. Iodide trapping. Next, transport of iodide to the lumen by pendrin and thyroglobulin into the follicular lumen. Actually, transport of iodide and thyroglobulin, they are independent process. I am mentioning both of them together here for easier memorization. Okay, both iodide ions and thyroglobulin, they are independently transported from the cell into the lumen. Then oxidation of the iodide by peroxidase enzyme and iodination of tyrosine amino acids in the thyroglobulin. This process is also called organification of thyroglobulin. And this also requires peroxidase enzyme. And next step is coupling of iodotyrosine residues to form thyroid hormones. This also requires peroxidase enzyme. Therefore, deficiency of peroxidase enzyme due to some genetic defects or due to use of some drugs will lead to decreased synthesis of thyroid hormones. Okay, this one shows chemical structure of monoiodotyrosine, MIT. This is iodotyrosine and there is one iodine here, therefore it is called iodotyrosine. Diiodotyrosine, two iodine components here. The purpose of showing this figure is just to show you why it is called monoiodotyrosine, mono or for now you need not remember the exact chemical structure. Now T3, how T3 is synthesized here? Coupling process. Coupling means pairing. Monoiodotyrosine and diiodotyrosine, they are coupled to form T3 here. Triiodothyronine. We can see here. 1, 2, 3. 3 iodine components here. Therefore, triiodo. In reverse T3, the one iodine is here instead of here. That is reverse. And physiological importance is not still clear there. And T4, 4 iodines here. Therefore, we call it tetraiodothyronine or thyroxine. T3, triiodothyronine, T4, tetraiodothyronine, more commonly called thyroxine. And after coupling reaction, there is pinocytosis of colloid droplets. And then proteolysis, releasing T3 and T4, and diffusion of thyroid hormones from the cell to the interstitium and then to capillary blood. And most of the thyroid hormones, quantitatively, most of the thyroid hormone that is secreted from the thyroid gland is thyroxine. About 93% here, there is mistake, it is 93%. Or you can just say 90%, above 90%. And around 7% is T3. But almost all of the T4, when it reaches the tissues, it is converted to T3 before it mediates its acts. Therefore, T4 is, you can say, a pro-hormone of T3. Means T3 will be synthesized from T4 in the tissues themselves. T3 is more potent than T4 also. Means physiologically more active. If we give same amount of T3 and T4, T3 will have much more significant or obvious physiological effects. Now, storage of thyroid hormones. In the thyroid follicles, thyroid hormones are stored in the thyroid follicles, in the colloid, bound to thyroglobulin molecules. Only the required amount of thyroid hormones is produced by endocytosis or pinocytosis of the thyroglobulin from the follicle, and remaining is stored there. And even if no new thyroid hormones, T3 and T4, are formed due to some reasons, iodine deficiency, complete absence of iodine in diet, still adequate amount of thyroid hormones will be released from the thyroid gland for up to 2 to 3 months. This is possible because there is storage of thyroid hormones bound to thyroglobulin, not in free form. While in the colloid, they are bound to thyroglobulin. And its clinical significance is, in such cases, when there is decrease in synthesis of thyroid hormones due to some reason, still thyroid hormone deficiency will not be clinically evident, or the symptoms or signs will not be there until 2 or 3 months have elapsed. Means there is adequate store for 2 to 3 months. And this is one unique feature of thyroid gland to store hormones. Other endocrine glands, they do not store hormones. Now, transport of thyroid hormones. When we say about transport, it is transport in blood. And as we know now, thyroid hormones, they are lipid soluble. And you know, lipid soluble substances, they are not transported in blood freely. They need to be bound with some other water soluble substance, because plasma is water, is mostly water. And therefore, in case of thyroid hormones, T3 and T4 also, we need some plasma proteins that bind with thyroid hormone molecules. And actually, more than 99% of the thyroid hormone molecules, they are bound to plasma proteins when they are transported. And remaining 1%, less than 1%, they are in the free form. But only the free form is physiologically active. Means the hormone molecules, they have to be freed from the bound proteins to act on the receptors. Therefore, only the free form is physiologically active. The significance of the binding is just to help transport. And if we talk about the transport proteins with which the thyroid hormone molecules they bind, there are some important ones. Thyroxine binding globulin. And you have to distinguish it from thyroglobulin. Thyroglobulin is found in the colloid, follicular lumen. But in the plasma, there are thyroxine binding globulin. Also, thyroxine binding prealbumin and thyroxine binding albumin. Though the name there is thyroxine, to some extent they can also transport for triiodothyronine. And more than 99% of triiodothyronine is also bound to these protein molecules. And when they reach the tissues, before they act there, they are released from the bound form slowly. And because of this slow nature of release, the transport proteins in the plasma, they act as the reservoir of hormone, because the free form will be released only slowly. Therefore, the form that remains bound with the transport proteins in the plasma, it can act as the reservoir. And thyroid hormones, they have slow onset and long duration of action. Slow onset and long duration of action. Importance of this information is, when we give thyroid hormones as a drug, we do not expect the effects in seconds or minutes. It will take some days. And also, when we stop the medicine, its effects will not go out immediately. It will remain there for some days. And this slow onset and long duration of action is probably due to plasma and intracellular protein binding. We have seen there are binding proteins in the plasma for transport, and also inside the cell, there are also binding proteins. And they act as the reservoir. Therefore, they release slowly, and therefore, the action is slow and also prolonged. And another mechanism may be their action mediated through gene transcription. They have intracellular receptors, and they act on the intracellular or nuclear receptor. And the mechanism of action is through protein synthesis, through gene transcription, translation, and protein synthesis. And it takes some time as compared to just opening of ion channels. Therefore, in comparison with some hormones that mediate their action by just opening ion channels or activating some enzymes, directly activating some enzymes, it takes a bit longer to see the action of thyroid hormones. Triiodothyronine shows about 4 times more rapid onset of action as compared to T4 thyroxine. T3 is more rapid in action than T4. T3 is also more potent, means same concentration of T3 will have greater effects as compared to same concentration of T4. But when the thyroid gland synthesizes or releases these hormones, only a small amount of T3 is produced in comparison to T4. But later in the tissues, most of T4 is converted to T3. Therefore, finally, the active hormone is T3 rather than T4. I think we do not have much time now. We will continue it in our next class. Just for now, try to answer these questions. And this is also summary of this class. Thyroid hormones. Name the thyroid hormones.
84.
You have to answer. Thyroid hormones. You have to write the names of thyroid hormones. Okay, T3, T4. T3 is triiodothyronine and T4 is thyroxine. Calcitonin is also produced from thyroid gland, but when we generally say thyroid hormones, we commonly refer to T3 and T4. Okay, therefore you just mention T3 and T4. Are synthesized and stored in, where are they synthesized and stored? The structure, anatomical structure, microscopic structure. Follicle, thyroid follicles. Follicles are also found in other organs also. Thyroid follicle just means a cavity lined by cells. Okay. For example, ovarian follicle. Here, the follicles, they are thyroid follicles. Okay, good. Solubility. Water soluble, more water soluble or more lipid soluble? More lipid soluble. Okay. Try to revise the general endocrine physiology class. Now we are going to start thyroid hormones, physiology of thyroid hormones. Have you studied thyroid gland in anatomy class? In anatomy?
Yes, sir.
We have already started. Okay, then that will be much easier. Okay, now we are going to start for today. To complete the physiology of thyroid glands, it will take about 2 classes. Today we will try to cover the introduction section, introduction to the thyroid hormones, then its biosynthesis and secretion, how thyroid hormones are synthesized in the body naturally, and how they are secreted from the thyroid gland. Then transport means how the synthesized and secreted thyroid hormones are transported from the thyroid gland to the rest of the body, to blood. It refers to, this process refers to transport. Transport of thyroid hormones in the blood from the thyroid gland to the target tissues throughout the body. Then mechanism of action, which refers to how thyroid hormone molecules act on the target tissue receptors and mediate their actions. It is mainly about the hormone receptor activation and the subsequent events. We'll try to cover this part of the physiology of thyroid hormones today, and rest of the physiology of thyroid hormones will be covered in our next class. From your previous background knowledge, you can answer some of these questions. Try to answer the questions, and you can answer by speaking, or you can write the answers in the chat box also. Try to answer these questions. These are simple, and I expect all of you to participate. Where is the thyroid gland located? Location of the thyroid gland, anatomical location. All of you will answer it.